The flood did not end the Nephilim. That is the part most people never reach. They know the giants died beneath the waters, and they think the nightmare closed there. But the Book of Enoch gives a darker ending. The bodies perished, the spirits did not. According to Enoch, when the giants died, something came out of them that could not return to heaven. It could not return to ordinary human death. It had no place prepared for it. So it remained here, hungry, restless, unburied, unfinished. And in one of the oldest explanations for demons, evil spirits are not fallen angels in chains. They are what was left when the Nephilim bodies were destroyed. Not giants walking across the earth anymore. Giants without bodies, that is the reversal. The monster did not survive the flood by escaping the water. It survived by losing its flesh. Chapter 1. The story was never just about giants. The safe version begins with size, because size is the easiest part of the horror to understand. A giant is simple. A giant is a body larger than yours, a shadow longer than yours, a strength you cannot match. That kind of monster belongs to distance, to old hills, ruined cities, and ancient battlefields. You can imagine the giant standing far away, safely locked inside the past where it cannot reach you. But Genesis does not introduce the Nephilim as a problem of height. Genesis introduces them as the consequence of a crossing. The sons of God saw the daughters of men, and from that union came the Nephilim. The phrase is short, almost brutally restrained, as if the text does not want to look too long. But inside that restraint is one of the darkest ideas in biblical horror. Something from above entered the human world in a way it was never meant to enter. Something that belonged to the heavenly order pressed itself into the order of flesh, and the result was not a miracle. The result was a body that proved the boundary had failed. That is why the word giant is too small. A giant can be an enemy. A giant can be a warrior. A giant can be a figure of strength, legend, or national memory. But the Nephilim are worse than that because their bodies are evidence. Their existence says a door opened where no door should have been. Their frame says heaven and earth touched in a forbidden way. Their hunger says the world had received something it was not designed to contain. This is the first reversal. The Nephilim were not frightening because they were tall. They were frightening because they made creation look damaged. And when a body is evidence of a crime, destroying the body does not erase the crime. It only changes where the evidence hides. That is why the flood matters so much. The flood looks like an ending. The waters rise, the corrupted age disappears, and the giant bodies vanish beneath judgment. For most retellings, that is enough. The earth is washed, Noah survives, the old world is gone. But Enoch refuses that clean ending. The Book of Enoch keeps looking at the place where the bodies sank. It asks the question Genesis leaves waiting in the dark. If the Nephilim were born from spirit and flesh, what happens when the flesh is destroyed? That question is the entire nightmare, because Enoch's answer is not peace. It is not silence. It is not a closed grave beneath ancient water. Enoch's answer is that the spirit comes out. The giant dies, but what made the giant wrong does not disappear. It remains close to the world that produced it. And suddenly, the story is no longer about giant bodies in the distant past. It is about invisible spirits in the present world. The Nephilim stop being an ancient species. They become the origin wound behind demons. And once that door opens, the flood no longer feels like the end of the monsters. It feels like the moment the monsters changed form. Chapter 2. The Watchers did not only fall. The Nephilim cannot be understood without the Watchers, because the Watchers are the first movement of the breach. In Enoch, the Watchers are heavenly beings assigned to observe, to witness, to stand above the human world. Their name already carries a warning. A watcher is supposed to look. Not touch, not descend, not take, not teach. Their office is distance, and distance is part of divine order. But the Book of Enoch says they crossed the distance deliberately. They descended to earth and bound themselves by oath upon Mount Hermon. That detail matters because the fall is not shown as confusion. It is not one angel wandering too close to a forbidden desire. It is a collective decision made under witness. They do not slip, they swear. The mountain becomes the crime scene because the mountain hears what the heavens will later judge. The Watchers do not simply desire human women. They reorganize the human world by bringing down knowledge that was not meant to be released. They teach weapons, they teach enchantments, they teach signs, roots, ornaments, and hidden ways of reading the world. In Enoch, forbidden knowledge is not decoration, it is machinery. Once it enters human hands, it keeps producing consequences. The Watchers become guilty instructors, and humanity becomes the classroom of a corrupted heaven. That is the second reversal. The horror was not only that angels took human wives. The horror was that heaven's systems were dragged below and placed inside mortal history. The offspring were only the most visible result. The Nephilim were the bodies of the breach. Forbidden knowledge was the culture of the breach. Together, they created a world where the old limits no longer held, and the Watchers themselves became trapped by the thing they had done. They had opened a category of being that had no rightful place in creation. They had produced offspring who were not angels yet not merely human. They had created a lineage that could stand on earth while carrying a spiritual origin from above. That is why the judgment in Enoch is not casual. Heaven does not respond as if a local sin has occurred. Heaven responds as if the architecture of the world has been damaged. The Watchers are not only punished because they rebelled, they are punished because their rebellion became fertile. It reproduced, it took on flesh, it walked the earth with a face. The Nephilim are the moment rebellion becomes biological. They are what happens when disobedience enters lineage. And lineage is more dangerous than a single act. An act can be condemned. A lineage can continue. An act can be remembered. A lineage can appear in the next generation with new eyes and a new name. That is why the Watcher's crime cannot be sealed by regret. The petition comes too late. The world is already altered. The giants are already alive. The earth is already groaning beneath what should never have been born. And even before the flood arrives, the story has already crossed the point of no return. The Watchers opened the door. The Nephilim walked through it. But Enoch's darkest claim is that when the door was forced shut, something still remained inside the room. Chapter 3. The Bodies That Should Not Exist. The Book of Enoch does not treat the Nephilim like ordinary children of unusual parents. It treats them as a crisis of nature. They are born from a union that confuses the categories on which creation depends. Heaven has its order, earth has its order, flesh has its order, spirit has its order. The Nephilim exist where those orders have been crossed without permission. That is why their bodies are not merely large bodies. Their bodies are arguments against the stability of the world. Every step they take says the boundary has already been broken. Every appetite they show says the mixture did not become harmless once it became visible. The old sources preserve their scale in ways that feel almost symbolic. But the symbol is the point. They are too large, too hungry, too forceful, too excessive in every direction. Their size is not a heroic gift. It is a symptom. Their appetite is not ordinary hunger. It is the physical expression of a spiritual disorder. When Enoch describes the giants consuming what the earth produces, the scene is not just about food. It is about incompatibility. The world cannot feed them because the world was never built for them. The land yields crops, the herds multiply. The ordinary cycle of life continues, but the Nephilim stand inside that cycle like a force from another system. They take more than the world can restore. They press against creation like a weight placed on a cracked foundation. And when the normal order fails to satisfy them, the violence spreads. The text makes the earth itself into a witness. The cries rise upward. The corruption is no longer hidden in private acts. It has become environmental. The world is not simply sinful. The world is unsafe. That distinction matters. Sin can be forgiven. But a world made unsafe has to be contained. The Nephilim are living proof that the Watcher's crime has become too large for ordinary correction. A sermon cannot fix it. A warning cannot reverse it. A command cannot make the bodies unborn. The problem has entered flesh, land, memory, and inheritance. This is why the flood is not just a punishment scene. It is the emergency response to a contaminated age. The giants do not stand at the edge of the story as colorful monsters. They stand at the center of the logic. Their bodies make the case for judgment. Their existence testifies against the Watchers. Their hunger testifies against the age. Their violence testifies against the future that would come if nothing intervened. The ancient world is not destroyed because heaven loses patience. It is destroyed because the breach has become self-reproducing, and once corruption learns to reproduce, mercy becomes more complicated. Because saving the world may require ending the version of the world that allowed it. That is the cold logic beneath the waters. The flood is not only wrath. The flood is containment at planetary scale. But containment always leaves one question behind. What happens to what the container cannot hold? Chapter 4. The flood was a quarantine. Most people imagine the flood as a cleansing, but Enoch makes it feel closer to a quarantine. The difference is important. Cleansing suggests dirt on a surface. Quarantine suggests contamination inside a system. Cleansing washes what can be washed. Quarantine separates what must not be allowed to keep spreading. The world before the flood is not merely dirty, it has become compromised. The Watchers have crossed the boundary. The Nephilim have filled the earth with excessive bodies. Forbidden knowledge has entered human practice. Violence has become atmosphere. The old order cannot simply be repaired from within because the damage is now part of the living world. So the waters come, not as random disaster, as a divine barrier. The flood places a wall between one age and the next. It buries the world that produced the giants and allows a thinner remnant to pass through. That is why the ark matters so much. The ark is not only rescue, it is separation. Inside it is a narrow future. Outside it is an age marked for closure. The door closes before the old world can force itself inside. The waters rise over the evidence. Cities disappear. Fields disappear. The enormous bodies that once made men feel small are brought down by something larger than they are. For once, the giants meet a force they cannot outgrow. The land that could not hold them gives way to water that can cover them. But Enoch's terror begins where the water stops. Because water can cover a body. Water can silence footsteps. Water can remove the visible sign of the breach. But water cannot decide the fate of a spirit whose origin was already mixed. This is the flaw inside the quarantine. It can isolate the age, it can end the bodies, it can keep the corrupted world from continuing in the same form. But the Nephilim were never only earth. They were born from flesh and spirit. So when the flesh is swallowed, the spiritual remainder becomes a new problem. The flood solves the visible crisis and reveals the invisible one. This is why the Enochic version feels more disturbing than the simple version. The simple version says judgment came and the monsters died. The Enochic version says, judgment came, the monsters died, and their spirits emerged from the ruin. That means the flood is both victory and transformation. It removes giants from the world of sight. It releases demons into the world of presence. The old terror no longer walks across valleys. It moves through houses, mines, deserts, tombs, and places where human order becomes weak. The giant has lost its body, but it has not lost its appetite. The body was the part judgment could reach. The appetite was the part judgment left wandering until the final appointed end. That is not a failed flood. It is a darker flood, one that ended the age of giant bodies and began the age of unclean spirits. Chapter 5, Enoch opens the grave. The central passage is found in Enoch 15, where the heavenly answer finally explains the origin of demons. From Enoch 15 into the opening of chapter 16, the verdict names the spirits and leaves them on earth. This is not a side detail. This is the mechanism beneath the entire nightmare. The Watchers have produced giants from spirit and flesh, and heaven names what those giants will become. Their bodies came from the earth, and those bodies can be destroyed, but their spirits have a different origin, and those spirits do not vanish with the body. The text says the spirits of the giants come out from their bodies. That is the line that changes everything. The grave opens, but not to receive them. The body falls, but something proceeds from it. The Nephilim do not simply die like men. They become posthumous forces in the human world. This is why Enoch describes them as evil spirits upon the earth. They remain here. They act here. They afflict here. They are not future enemies waiting in a distant underworld. They are present consequences. The dead giants become active spirits in the world of the living. This is one of the oldest and clearest demon origins in Jewish apocalyptic tradition. Not every later theology follows it. Not every religious tradition makes it central. But inside the Book of Enoch's own world, this is the canon of the story. Demons are the spirits released from the bodies of the Nephilim. That is the detail most retellings skip because it is too specific and too unsettling. It gives demons a birth certificate. It gives them ancestry. It gives them a corpse behind the spirit. The demon is not explained as a vague, dark force. The demon is explained as the remainder of a forbidden body. Pause on that. In this tradition, every evil spirit carries the memory of a giant. Not memory as nostalgia, memory as structure. The spirit once had a body that towered above men. It once moved through the world with weight, appetite, and visible dominance. Then judgment stripped that body away. What remains is not calm. What remains is deprivation. A bodiless giant is still giant in its nature. It has simply lost the shape that made its size measurable. That is why the invisible demon can be more frightening than the visible Nephilim. A visible giant can be mapped. You know where its feet touch the earth. You know where its shadow falls. You know when it is approaching. But a giant spirit has no edge, no height, no body to contain the force that once stood in flesh. It becomes pressure. It becomes impulse. It becomes oppression. It becomes a hunger moving through the world without a face that can be confronted. That is the Enochic demon. Not a cartoon devil, not a random monster. A giant after death, stripped of body but not stripped of appetite. Chapter 6, Why the Spirits Had Nowhere to Go. The most disturbing part of Enoch's demon origin is not only that the spirits survive, it is that they survive because they do not belong anywhere else. A human soul belongs to the human order. An angel belongs to the heavenly order, even when judged for leaving it. But the Nephilim were born between categories. Their fathers were spirits who had abandoned their appointed place. Their mothers were human women within the earthly order. Their bodies were earthly. Their origin was not. Their existence was an unresolved case before death ever touched them. So when the body dies, the universe has a classification problem. Where does the spirit of a forbidden hybrid go? It cannot simply rise to heaven as if it were angelic and pure. Its very existence came from an act heaven condemned. It cannot simply enter ordinary human rest as if it were only human. Its spirit was formed from a crossing beyond ordinary human nature. It cannot return to the Watchers because the Watchers themselves are under sentence. It cannot become innocent by losing flesh. Death does not purify an unlawful origin. It exposes it. That is why the spirits remain on Earth. Not because Earth is their throne, because Earth is their exile. They are trapped near the world that made them possible. They are bound to the plane of their contamination. This is a subtler horror than chains. Chains are visible. Chains mean there is a place where the prisoner is kept. But these spirits are imprisoned by placelessness. They have no lawful home, so the world itself becomes their wandering ground. That is why they are restless. Rest requires order. Rest requires a place prepared for the being that enters it. The Nephilim spirits have no such place. They are the spiritual remainder of a breach that creation refuses to normalize. They remain because no realm will fully claim them. This makes the demonic feel less like rebellion and more like residue. A residue is what remains after the visible thing has been removed. A stain after the body is gone. A smell after the fire is out. A pressure in a room where the crime has already ended. The Nephilim spirits are the residue of the Watcher's descent. They are the afterbirth of forbidden knowledge. They are the unburied remainder of a world the flood was meant to close. And because they are not allowed to settle, they keep moving. This movement becomes affliction. It becomes harassment. It becomes the unseen pressure Enoch says they will bring upon humanity. Their punishment is also our inheritance. They cannot go home, so they remain near us. They cannot receive bodies of their own, so they press against ours. They cannot rebuild the giant age openly, so they reproduce its logic in hidden ways. Appetite without rest. Power without obedience. Knowledge without permission. Presence without rightful form. That is what makes them demons. Not merely that they are evil. but that they are unresolved beings made from a forbidden act. Chapter 7. The giant became atmosphere. When the Nephilim had bodies, the horror was architectural. Their size changed the world around them. A gate had to be higher. A bed had to be longer. A battlefield had to be judged differently. A city had to decide whether its walls meant anything at all. The human world had to physically react to their scale. But when the Nephilim became spirits, the horror changed from architecture to atmosphere. A spirit does not need a gate. It does not need a road. It does not need a valley wide enough to hold its frame. It enters the world through pressure instead of footsteps. It appears as oppression, unrest, terror, compulsion, and disorder. The giant becomes something you cannot measure but still feel. That is the true nightmare of the dead Nephilim. They become harder to prove, and therefore harder to resist. The visible giant forces fear from the outside. The invisible giant spirit works from within the conditions of human weakness. It does not need to strike a wall if it can make the people inside the wall turn against one another. It does not need to consume a harvest if it can consume peace. It does not need to tower above a king if it can bend a king toward pride. It does not need to build the giant age again with bodies. It can rebuild the giant age as a pattern. That pattern is the same one Enoch already showed. Taking what is not permitted, consuming what cannot replenish, teaching what corrupts the student, crossing boundaries until boundaries feel imaginary. The demon continues the Nephilim by making smaller beings reenact giant desires. This is why the origin matters. If demons are only evil spirits from nowhere, they are frightening but abstract. If demons are the spirits of Nephilim, their behavior has a history. Their hunger comes from the giant body. Their restlessness comes from the lost body. Their hatred of order comes from the unlawful body. Their fascination with human life comes from the human doorway that first gave them form. They are not random, they are ancestral. And the ancestry points back to the first great contamination. This makes human beings terrifyingly close to the story. The Nephilim were born through human flesh. Their spirits remain drawn to the human world because the human world was part of their origin. They do not haunt mountains only. They haunt the category that helped make them. They haunt humanity. That does not mean humanity caused the Watcher's rebellion. The guilt begins with the beings who cross the boundary from above. But humanity becomes the ground where the consequence continues to move. The earth was the place of the crime. The human body was the door. The Nephilim body was the evidence. And the demon is what remains when the evidence becomes invisible. This is why Enoch's demonology feels so severe. It does not give evil a distant location. It makes evil an atmosphere around the living. The giant became air, and the air still remembers the shape of the giant. Chapter 8. Why demons seek bodies. Once demons are understood as Nephilim spirits, their desire for bodies becomes more disturbing. A bodiless spirit is not merely invisible, it is deprived. It has lost the condition through which it once acted upon the world. The Nephilim were never pure angels. They were never pure human souls. They were spirits joined to flesh in a forbidden way. So the loss of flesh is not a natural transition for them. It is a wound in their identity. This gives a darker logic to the ancient stories of unclean spirits seeking human contact. They are not looking for bodies because bodies are convenient. They are looking for bodies because bodies were part of what they were. The material world is not foreign to them. It is the place where they first became real. That makes their hunger intimate. They do not only want to harm humanity from the outside, they want access to the human frame, because human flesh once formed the doorway of their existence. That is why the Enochic demon feels like a giant trying to return through a smaller door. The spirit remembers scale, but the available entrance is human. The old body is gone. The new host is inadequate. And that inadequacy produces torment. The spirit cannot become a giant again, but it can make the human being carry giant impulses. Excessive appetite, violent will, corrupted knowledge, domination. Possession, in this reading, is not just invasion, it is a failed resurrection. The Nephilim spirit tries to borrow flesh because judgment took its own. It tries to speak through a mouth because the old mouth is gone. It tries to move through limbs because its own limbs were returned to ruin. But the borrowed body cannot contain what the spirit remembers being. That mismatch is the horror. A human soul becomes pressured by something that remembers an impossible size. A human house becomes a chamber for a pre-flood appetite. A human life becomes the battlefield where the giant age attempts a smaller return. This is why the old stories treat unclean spirits as both weak and dangerous. They are weak because they lack bodies. They are dangerous because they never accepted that lack. They are remnants, but remnants can still poison the future. A fragment of a forbidden age can be enough to reopen the logic of that age. One spirit can whisper the old lesson. One desire can make forbidden knowledge feel like liberation. One impulse can make domination feel natural. That is how the dead giants keep teaching, not with the public instruction of the Watchers, with inward pressure, with appetite disguised as identity, with the suggestion that limits are insults and boundaries are chains. The Watchers descended once. Their offspring died once. But the spirits continue the descent inside human weakness. The giant no longer needs to stand over the world. It only needs the world to desire what the giant desired. Chapter 9. The Unclean Spirit and the Old World. The New Testament often presents unclean spirits as already present in the world. They appear with frightening confidence. They recognize authority. They resist expulsion. They know judgment is coming, and yet they are still active before that appointed time. The text does not always stop to explain where they came from. It assumes a world already crowded with invisible hostility. That silence becomes more meaningful beside Enoch. Enoch supplies one ancient answer to the question the later texts often leave open. The spirits are here because the giants died. They are unclean because their origin was unlawful. They are restless because their bodies were destroyed before their influence was fully removed. They know judgment because they are already living inside a delayed sentence. This does not mean every tradition has only one explanation for demons. The history of demonology is layered, and later theology develops many categories. But the Enochic answer has a specific terror nothing else quite replaces. It makes demons the afterlife of the flood. Every unclean spirit becomes a reminder that the waters did not leave the earth empty. Every exorcism becomes a small confrontation with something older than empire. Every cry in the wilderness becomes an echo from the drowned world. That is why the spirits fear being sent away before the time. They are not free in the fullest sense. They are in delay. They exist between the judgment that ended their bodies and the judgment that will end their wandering. That delay is the haunted age. The giant age is over, but its spirits still move. The flood has passed, but its unresolved remainder still presses against humanity. The demons are not waiting for history. They are history that refused to become past. This makes their presence feel less like superstition and more like a memory disorder in creation itself. The world remembers what should have been erased. It remembers through spirits. It remembers through fear. It remembers through the recurrence of the same old patterns. Human beings continue to reach for forbidden knowledge. Rulers continue to dream of domination. Cultures continue to worship strength without restraint. The old giant logic keeps returning even without giant bodies, and Enoch gives that recurrence a spiritual mechanism. The spirits of the giants are still here, pushing the world toward the shape of the age that was drowned. Not always as spectacle, not always as obvious possession. Sometimes as atmosphere, sometimes as culture, sometimes as a pressure that makes corruption feel ancient, inevitable, and almost familiar. That is the deepest dread of this origin story. It says demons are not interruptions of history. They are leftovers from history's first great rupture. Chapter 10. The detail most retellings skip. Most videos about the Nephilim stop at the wrong moment. They build the giants. They describe the Watchers. They reach the flood. Then they let the water close the story. That makes the episode clean, dramatic, and incomplete. Because the darkest sentence comes after the bodies fall. The Book of Enoch does not let the viewer look away once the giants are dead. It follows what comes out. That is the detail most retellings avoid because it changes the monster. A living giant is visual. A dead giant spirit is theological. A living giant can become a thumbnail. A dead giant spirit becomes a doctrine of evil. And doctrine is more dangerous because it does not need a face to survive. The Enochic origin of demons turns the Nephilim from ancient creatures into ongoing explanation. It says the world's invisible evil has a genealogy. It says demonic pressure is not random shadow. It says the thing tormenting the living may be the remnant of something drowned before recorded kingdoms rose. This is why Enoch 15 through 16 feels like a sealed file opening. The passage does not merely add lore. It connects the pre-flood world to the haunted world after it. It explains why judgment can be real, and yet evil remains active. The answer is not that the flood failed. The answer is that the flood was aimed first at bodies. The spirits are dealt with differently. They remain as witnesses against the watchers. They remain as consequences of forbidden union. They remain as the living punishment of a crime that tried to create life outside divine order. Their existence tells the watchers that the crime cannot be undone. Every demon is a reminder of what they produced. Every affliction is testimony. Every restless movement upon earth says the same thing. You crossed the boundary, and the boundary remembered. It turns the demons into more than predators. They are evidence preserved by judgment. They are the punishment that continues after the punished bodies are gone. They are the echo of the Watcher's oath moving through generations that never stood on Hermon. This is the part that makes the story feel unfair to the human world. The Watchers sinned, the Nephilim died, but humanity inherits the spirits. The earth becomes the chamber where the unresolved consequence wanders. The living become the population among whom the dead giants move invisibly. And suddenly the origin of demons is not only a monster story, it is a story about being born after an ancient crime and still living among its aftermath. That is more frightening than a giant. A giant threatens your body. An aftermath threatens the world you mistake for normal. Chapter 11. The demon has a corrupted function. The strongest mythological demons are not random evil. They are corrupted functions. Something that once had a role, a structure, or an origin has been twisted into a hostile form. In Enoch, the Nephilim spirits become exactly that. They are not fallen angels performing angelic rebellion. They are not human dead returning with human grief. They are a function created by mixture and broken by judgment. They exist as appetite without body, inheritance without home, power without lawful office, memory without rest. This is why they are described as afflicting the earth. Affliction is not always spectacular. Affliction is pressure. It is the invisible force that makes life bend toward ruin. It is the sense that something old is leaning on the present. The Nephilim spirits become the corrupted function of the giant body. The giant body once consumed the world openly. The demon consumes it indirectly. The giant body once dominated through size. The demon dominates through influence. The giant body once made the human world physically small. The demon makes the human will spiritually small. The same pattern continues under a different condition. This makes the word demon heavier. It is not merely a label for something frightening. It is the name for a being whose existence is structurally wrong. A demon, in this Enochic reading, is not evil because it chooses darkness in the ordinary way. It is evil because it is the living remainder of a violated order. Its nature is born from disorder. Its restlessness comes from disorder. Its activity spreads disorder. It can only reproduce the wound from which it came. That is why it cannot build peace. Peace would mean accepting a rightful place, and the Nephilim spirit has no rightful place. That is why it cannot truly create. Creation requires order. The demon can imitate, distort, occupy, pressure, and corrupt, but it cannot restore the harmony its origin denied. It is a spirit formed from a crime against boundaries, so it keeps attacking boundaries. Between body and will, between desire and restraint, between knowledge and permission, between the human and the monstrous, between the living world and the dead age beneath it. That is the hidden mechanism. The demon does not merely want a victim. The demon wants the world to resemble the breach again. It wants the door opened again. It wants the old confusion of categories to become normal. and if it cannot bring back the giant body, it can still bring back the giant principle. Make appetite sacred, make domination admirable. Make forbidden knowledge feel like destiny. Make the human being believe every limit is an enemy. That is how the Nephilim spirits remain dangerous after the flood. They do not need to raise the old bodies. They only need to raise the old logic. Chapter 12. What happens when a giant dies? So what happens when a giant dies? In the safe version, the answer is simple. The body falls. The threat ends. The world moves on. But the Book of Enoch gives a darker answer. When a Nephilim dies, the body returns to ruin, but the spirit proceeds from the body. It remains upon the earth because it was born from a union that had no lawful future. It becomes an evil spirit because its nature is unresolved, hungry, and exiled from proper rest. It becomes a demon because death cannot turn a forbidden origin into an innocent one. That is the central horror. The demon is not the opposite of the giant. The demon is the giant after the body has been taken away. The flood did not create a world without monsters. It created a world where the largest monsters no longer needed size. The waters erased the footprints. They erased the enormous shadows. They erased the visible bodies that had made the earth groan. But they did not erase the appetite. They did not erase the spiritual remainder. They did not erase the consequence of the Watcher's descent. They did not erase what came out when the giant body failed. This turns the entire Nephilim story inside out. The most dangerous moment is not when the giants are born. It is not when they consume. It is not even when the waters rise. The most dangerous moment is after the body dies, after the valley is quiet, after the world believes the nightmare has been buried. That is when the spirit emerges. That is when the monster becomes harder to see. That is when the Nephilim stop being a race of giants and become a population of demons. The dead giant becomes an unclean presence. The drowned age becomes a haunted atmosphere. The old violence becomes a pressure inside the living world. And humanity, born after the waters, inherits a battlefield it did not create. That is why the Book of Enoch's demon origin is so powerful. It does not give us demons as an unexplained darkness. It gives us demons as historical remains. It gives us evil spirits with a source, a wound, a genealogy, and a reason to hate the limits of creation. They are not alive as giants. They are not dead as men. They are the unfinished middle. The remains of a forbidden crossing. The afterlife of bodies heaven never wanted the earth to produce. And that is why the Nephilim are more terrifying dead than alive. Alive, they were too large for the world. Dead, they became close enough to whisper. Alive, they stood above humanity. Dead, they press against humanity from the unseen side. Alive, they were evidence of the breach. Dead, they became the breach moving without a body. The flood buried the giants. But according to Enoch, it did not bury what came out of them. So leave your verdict carefully. Were demons born from rebellion in heaven, or from the bodies of giants judgment could not fully erase? Write your answer like testimony, because stories this old treat every interpretation like an opened door. Subscribe before the next forbidden archive is unsealed. The drowned world is gone, but the spirits that rose from it were never buried beneath the water.